Strive and Thrive is a collection of discussions featuring guests from various fields, focused on guiding entrepreneurs in creating businesses that excel in every aspect: people, planet, and profit. Throughout the series, you can join us, Romesh and Mike, as we explore relevant topics with our guests which can help businesses thrive.
Romesh and I met while I was supporting a client transform their business, and I needed finance director support and reached out to him and his team. Since then, we've become good friends who share a passion for business and entrepreneurship. If you like today's discussion, then you want to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. Hi everyone, and welcome to Strive and Thrive. On today's show, I'd like to welcome Sarat. So great to have you on the show. Welcome, Sarat.
Hi, Mike.
Great to have you. I met Sarat about 10 years ago now while I was working in Talis. He supported us on a couple of projects, but also he was one of the catalysts for one of our friends, Kebab Abbott, who has now set up a business and doing really well. But as part of that, I got the opportunity to go up and visit Sarat in Newcastle and meet his team. And when I went up there, what I saw at Hedgehog Labs was a different type of business. They stood out as being very unique, and I've followed them ever since. So I've been really looking forward to bringing Sarat on today and to learn about his experience setting up Hedgehog Labs. But this time feels really good for Sarat as well, because he's now exited that business and he's started on a new journey. So we'll get to talk to Sarat about overall his experience of setting up Hedgehog Labs, what that's meant to him, exiting the business and the emotional journey that is for everybody, and what next, and what unfolds in a new world of AI, which I know we've touched on. So today's going to be really interesting. So Sarat, thanks for joining us and welcome to Strive and Thrive. Now, as an introduction, what I'd love you to do is could you give a brief history in 1 minute of your experience, and then we'll go and find out some more.
Hi, Mike and Romesh. Thank you for having me on the show. Really looking forward to this conversation. I'll try and keep it as short as possible as an intro. To be honest, my experience and career is quite short. I started straight out of university, tried to launch a business that failed miserably the first time over when I was very young. A typical software engineer's approach to starting a business without any consideration to things like sales and marketing, which meant I had to go back to being employed for the only one and ever time in my life. Ended up getting a job at a digital agency up in Newcastle called Think. Very short period for about 15 months, and I've always had an entrepreneurial bug, and I've always been interested in starting businesses, running them, etc. And I was really intrigued by this idea, and certainly in the early 2000s, professional services was a really difficult place. And with my co-founder, Mark Foster, who at that time also was working with me, we kind of started thinking about what if we started a different kind of consultancy. So it's really interesting. You talked about, you felt that there was a different field to Hedgehog Lab because that was the DNA of the business. A consultancy that ironically, 20 years ago, we were thinking about focusing very much on the people. One of our values was people are our biggest assets. And in those years, that wasn't a mantra, it is now. I've done that for about 19 years. So most of my professional career has been spent, growing Hedgehog Lab, building it, taking it through multiple private equity exits. And then, as you rightly said, about end of last year, December 2025, I had this idea that's been in my head for a long time, and I felt I needed to explore it. And I built a management team, a succession plan at Hedgehog Lab, and decided to move forward to now start thredspan, which is my new business that I'm working on.
Wow, that's a great summary, Sarat. Thank you so much for that. And what an interesting path to this point. Very well done to you for,
Thank you.
Starting at such a young age. That's really striking, right? So, gosh, it sounds like you started your first business, which predates Hedgehog, and that was before you even had a job, by the sounds of it from your description. That's amazing. You then worked at a business for a short period of time, and then you set up Hedgehog. How did you find that experience? Did you take any of the learnings from the first business and use that to inform the setup of the next business?
Short answer, no, Romesh. And I think, in retrospect, and, people talk about, when you go on a journey, you kind of, when you're in that journey, you don't really have a chance to reflect it. You always reflect afterwards, after the, certainly after 19 years. And certainly I took a few months off after I left Hedgehog Lab, and certainly got me reflecting on that. So the short answer is no, because I still feel like when we started Hedgehog Lab, I was fairly entrepreneurial, and actually, ironically, the business I started when I was at university, that was the first business, wasn't actually the first business that I attempted to start. Actually, when I was younger, when I was just out of school in high school, I didn't actually want to go into education. My parents were really keen for me to go into university. I'm Indian, so Indian parents are very kind of, rigorous about education and university. I actually wanted to start a business when I was 16, and I was living in the Middle East, and I had this great idea, etc. But my father, I think quite rightly, convinced me about the benefits of university and education. And ironically, the things I gained from university wasn't necessarily education as much as understanding, a lot of the things that set the foundation for me going out to start a business. And so, the short period of employment, 15 months, I think, was almost for me a stopgap, right? I mean, I never really wanted to go into employment. I had a business, I did some freelancing, I think, and really the only reason I had to get a job was I moved up north to Newcastle, when after me and my wife met and we got married. And I came to this new area, and I couldn't really do freelancing because I didn't have any contacts. I didn't necessarily, know any of the people in the region. So the safest, secure way to get a mortgage, to buy a car, etc., was to just go and get a job. And the fact that it lasted 15 months probably shows you that, I didn't intend for it to last for a long time. To be honest, I mean, in retrospect, that 15 months were really exciting, and I joined one of the fastest growing digital agencies in those times. It's a company called Think. I mean, it used to be called Think. They sold to a company called EPAM a few years ago, and that was a rocket ship. I mean, I think when I joined, I was employee number 11 or 12. And within a year, we'd grown the business to about 40 people. Then, and then eventually the business continued to grow, and actually went on its own private equity journey. And that really reinforced my belief that, what I wanted to do was do something by myself. But as I said, one of the things I always noticed was professional services had a very different feel to it in those years. It wasn't as people centric as it is right now, certainly consultancy. And me and my co-founder felt like we could bring a different way of doing things to a consultancy, and that's how we started Hedgehog Lab. But I don't think, I really don't think, in retrospect, I took many of the learnings out of the first business failure, because if you remember, I said now with reflection 25 years later, one of the reasons the first business failed, and it was a software business, it was a SaaS business, and one of the reasons the first business failed was I was a brilliant software engineer. Well, okay, I was a good software engineer, and I set up this software business and didn't really get the ABCs of sales and marketing. And so you ended up with a really good product that, technically was brilliant, but literally nobody wanted to buy because it had no, go-to-market strategy. Ironically, when I started Hedgehog Lab, and not a lot of people know this, but Hedgehog Lab wasn't originally founded to be a consultancy. Hedgehog Lab was originally founded to be a software products business. It was a SaaS business. It was a financial services software business. But unfortunately, we launched just a few weeks after the run on Northern Rock happened, the financial crisis happened. And originally, Hedgehog Lab was targeting providing software to the financial services industry. And so that was a really, really challenging time. So we pivoted into consultancy because that felt the most natural thing to do, because the cost of selling services is really your skills and a laptop or a desktop at that time. So we kind of fell into it, but I certainly didn't necessarily have the experience, in retrospect now, looking at it, in 2006, 2007, I certainly didn't have the experience or the skills at that time to effectively found and scale a business. And I always joke that Hedgehog Lab is probably the most expensive MBA I never paid for, in the sense of, it taught me everything about business over the last 19 years.
Okay. Well, that's remarkably brave of you, I think, to kind of say, no, something didn't work and actually just moved on, via a stint at an organization where you're an employee, but just went on and created another business. Now that's interesting. I'm sure you've had time to reflect, but what was different about Hedgehog then? So you had pivoted, which is interesting. So you set it up for something and then pivoted. And maybe there's a theme there where you identified that there wasn't, the market for what you might have been looking to provide as a product. So there could be a link. But what were the key learnings for you at that point? You'd set up Hedgehog. You'd already made a pivot quite early on. What informed you to kind of drive forwards and be successful, particularly in the early years?
Yeah, and I think, Hedgehog Lab actually pivoted a couple of times. Actually, by this month, we would have pivoted 3 times overall. And I think, one of my learnings is, to be a successful entrepreneur or to run a successful business, you have to be able to pivot successfully. In the enterprise, we talk a lot about transformation, and ultimately transformation in some sense is being able to make a big bet on some of those big pivots. So we were lucky that our first pivot came really, really quickly. We pivoted into a consultancy, I think probably 2 or 3 months into the launch of the company, since we started trading, because it became very evident in kind of mid 2007 that we were not going to be able to succeed as a software firm selling software to financial services. So that pivot was easy. But I think, from my experience and, thinking through the reflection of it, for me, being able to pivot is a key aspect of being an entrepreneur and a business person. And also to that point of being able to dust yourself off. When my first business failed, and to be honest, every time there is a problem in a business, you still feel attached to it, and you still feel incredibly, hurtful. It's hurtful when a business fails or when it's in trouble. But I think to be an entrepreneur and to be a business person, you have to have the resilience to move on pretty quickly. And, we talk about the Hedgehog Lab story today as if, it's been 19 years. It's a very successful global organization. But there were many periods in that time, certainly in the early years, when we were probably about a week away from shutting down. So you've got to be able to have that resilience and that tenacity to keep going. Sometimes I think you need to know when to stop, so it's not certainly that, keep going against all odds. Sometimes you have to have an understanding of when to stop. But at the same time, I think, what my first business taught me, and certainly setting up Hedgehog Lab at a young age taught me, was that resilience and grit matter far more than strategy or business ideas, etc. The second thing it taught me was very much about culture. We were very proud. And I was 25 at the time when I wrote the culture framework for Hedgehog Lab. That is a culture framework that still exists today, 20 years on. It's the same framework, it is the same framework that allowed us to survive difficult times. It's the same framework that allowed us to grow as we grow as an organization. And that was really important to me, to be able to have a culture framework. And it was actually quite unheard of. I remember there was an early advisor who said to me, why are you wasting your time writing this culture stuff and this purpose and mission and all of these things? Just focus on making revenue, right? Because for a young company, certainly a company that had no product market fit in the first 3 months, the biggest driver, and remember, we were two young people. My co-founder was similar age to me. We were literally living on beans on toast. We had mortgages. We had uh, small families, and so the imperative was to make revenue. And yet there we were being deliberate about organizational design, being deliberate about writing our culture framework, thinking about what it means for us, thinking about behaviors and values. And so those are the two big lessons I took away from those early years, is about being deliberate about org design and having that resilience and grit are far more important than, to your point, having a perfect idea, because eventually you end up pivoting anyway.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So tell me about, we've discussed previously, we've met obviously before, about the importance of culture to your organization and to your business journey. So can you tell me what the culture framework involved and why it was so important?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a culture framework, and it's really tricky because culture is I think at the end of it a collective essence of actions and the things that people do. Point is, while when we started out, culture was something we wrote down, it was more important that it was lived, much more than wrote down. So for me, it was being very deliberate about the purpose. Why does this organization exist beyond just making a profit? It's being deliberate about your mission and your vision. What is the difference we're going to make in this world? And then being deliberate about values. One of the things I always found interesting, and certainly the business, theory and strategy around values has evolved so much over the last 20 years. But 20 years ago, and still now, values are things like, honesty and transparency and things that are just generally things you'd expect of any business. I mean, you don't want to work with a dishonest business. You don't want to work with a business that's opaque. Integrity, like these are all like table stakes. And we were very deliberate about our values. And we said, the values are going to be things we can kind of almost, to the point that Mike was making earlier, that makes us look unique. It makes us different from all the other consultancies. And we chose values that were more verbal, and so they were more verbs. They were things we can act on and we can add behaviors to it, rather than just say, our values are we're honest, we have integrity, etc. Which is, values have to mean something, because if the opposite of it cannot be true, then they're not really values in the sense that,
So what were these values? I'm really interested in this. So you made them an action, a verb. So what were they? Can you
Well, I mean, the four values at Hedgehog Lab, and certainly, I think they probably could use evolving because they're 20 years old. But when we founded it, the first one was to remain focused. And actually, the focus is the very part of the Hedgehog concept on which Hedgehog Lab was founded. And we had a slogan for it, a tagline that one of our marketing guys developed a few years later, which was, we call it "Be the Hedgehog," and being the hedgehog. That first value was swappable. So the original value was remain focused, but it was also about being the hedgehog. And the point was, in our industry, there is quite a propensity, certainly in digital consulting and technology consulting, to be everything for everybody, right? We'll do a bit of ERP, we'll do a bit of Salesforce, we'll do a bit of mobile apps, we'll do a bit of web apps, etc. And we wanted to be very focused on, what we did, and which was very much our passion has always been what we call digital products, and that evolved over the years around, whether that was mobile apps, etc. So the first one was remain focused. The second one was, we called it turn customers into fans, and that was really strange because companies don't have fans, right? Like, actors have fans, singers have fans, athletes have fans. But we were really deliberate about that value because we wanted it to be, we always knew that in consulting, the service element was what was really the differentiator, right? Because if you went to another company, they probably could do a similar quality of work that we did, but actually how we showed up to our customers and the relationships we built, and to be able to turn your customers into fans, you can then have a longer running business. The third one was building software people love, or build what people love. And I think we were really passionate about software. And again, you can start seeing words in here like love and fans that are much more consumer oriented. We wanted to build software that really set the bar for what great looked like, not just, oh, let's just, do utilitarian stuff. And the last one is such a cliche right now, but I can assure you in 2005, 2006, when I was thinking about the values, it wasn't an important value, which is people are our greatest asset. And it's ironic now because everywhere I turn, everybody says people are our greatest asset. But they weren't saying it in 2005, 2006, and certainly in the consultancy sector. So those were our four core values. And then we had a bunch of behaviors that then, went underneath it where, I would do an induction, and every time somebody new joined, we talk them through the history of the company and the culture and the values. And then, the problem with values is when you have some words, no one really knows how to live them. So you have to then encode them into specific behaviors. So we'd go, well, what does this mean to turn customers into fans? So here are some behaviors that demonstrate that.
Yeah, I really like that. And sorry, I know Mike is champing at the bit to ask you some further questions, but I must ask this because I think I've really enjoyed this bit of the conversation. Thank you. Do you have some good examples of how you can turn customers into fans?
Yeah, I think, in terms of our behavioral, kind of framework that we put for values, I think again, none of them are rocket science, right? Being able to challenge your customers. I think many of our customers come to us because they trust us. They go to any consultancy because they trust them to be a partner in dealing with some complex challenges that they're facing, whether it's innovation, whether it's building a new product. So you have to have a mindset of where you're challenging and not just being yes men. I think that was really important. I think being very specific about the craft, so we call it building the right thing the right way. That was really important because, if you care about the craft, customers can see that. And also, if you look at the artisan way of doing things, that's why people buy from artisan producers, because they care about the craft. They care about, how the sausage is made. And also, the other values then dive into that, because if you care about beautiful software, if you care about building great software, that's something customers can buy into. If you look after your people, because ultimately, when you boil it down to everything in a consultancy, what are you working with? You're not working with computers or robots or machinery or, industrial gear. You're working with people. And so having a value where we look after our people and prioritize them makes it greater. So when clients come to meetings or they do some work, or when there are challenging situations, they get to work with a bunch of people that are living in an environment and working in an environment that is psychologically safe and optimized for a people business.
Yeah, I really like that, and it's so important. And Mike, can I thank you, Sarah, and Mike, can I ask you, is that do you try and make your customers fans? Is that an area you try and focus on?
It's not a phrase I would have naturally used, but I like how you've used it, Sarah. And I think one of the things I saw different at Hedgehog Labs, would I say I was a fan? Perhaps in hindsight I was I just saw an organization that approached itself differently. And my thinking around how you've articulated it on this call, Sarah, is I'm going to try and just check my notes so I get it right. We talk a lot on Strive and Thrive about resilience. That comes out all the time, and you've touched on that. But what you've touched on with the cultural narrative is around how you create an adaptive organization that can adapt. And you mentioned pivoting, you mentioned you tried in the finance sector and you became a consultancy, and next it could go anywhere. But if you've got the right resilience and right cultural behaviors within the organization, actually what you are can evolve. And I think I'm surprised how much that's coming out at the minute with a lot of our interviews. We're interviewing so many people now who are like this. The external environment is so tricky. You don't know really where your customers are going to come from, how they're going to behave, short-term versus long-term behavior. What are the key threads that we can do to navigate this? And you've picked up two key ones, culture and and resilience, and have those two strong things in place. And my question for you, Sarah, off the back of that is, after my long diatribe, is what made you look that way as a 25-year-old software engineer? Because that's an insight really onto an organization that is from a more experienced entrepreneur, I would say. Was there something that triggered you? Was it?
When you say what made you look that way, Mike, is it specifically around the culture and some of the values we thought
particularly
about?
the culture. I guess resilience is a learned behavior, right? But particularly the culture, because that was a key part of when you set up Hedgehog Labs. What was it that gave you that inspiration?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, as I said, part of the Hedgehog Lab founding story, I think a lot of it was, you get education in the real world, which is you go into companies and you work and you get the experience. I couldn't claim a lot of that, in that I only had realistically, if you exclude my freelancing career, I've only really had a job for about 15 months, right? That's really, well, actually, except for a really short gig in Staples when I was at university, that was the only proper job I had. I think it comes from my personal interest. So I'm an avid reader, and that's where a lot of my company names, company values, thinking comes from. And I'm an avid reader of nonfiction, so I like to absorb nonfiction, whether it's and not just nonfiction in terms of business nonfiction. I'm a massive, like, I believe in Buddhist principles and Stoic principles. I believe in some of those movements around the humanist kind of movements. And I think it came from like this human-centered thinking of, like, ultimately, I genuinely believe that work should be designed around humans, whether we live in a capitalistic society or a communist, it doesn't necessarily matter, but work should be designed around humans. And when I went to the world of work in those years, and as good as this company was, like I said, with hindsight, this company I worked at for 15 months was a brilliant company. There was a lot going on. People were trying to figure out how to scale a company and double year on year on. But still, there were some things that was missing for me, in that how do you design an organization around human beings and their, some incredibly talented human beings and their ability to show up at work and perform to the best of their ability. So I think a lot of my thinking evolved from a lot of reading I did, observe a lot of philosophy, read philosophers, psychology, etc. So it came probably more from my personal values and the things that I admire and value in life. And I kind of went, honestly, Mike, some of it was naivety, right? At that age, you kind of went, like,
should you say that
like,
and not just give yourself credit for reflective
well,
and insights?
well, no. I guess what I mean by that is naivety, in that you believe that you could have a different type of world, in which I guess naivety in that,
okay, yeah, interesting.
In the sense that professional services can be different. We can build a product, a company that's people first, because you hear about all the negative behaviors of professional services, right? I mean, I won't name names, but look at the big consultancies, and, every week they're in the paper because, there's fraud or there's some sort of things, or, there's bullying and all sorts of things going on. And ultimately, don't get me wrong, people are not perfect, and I am, of all people, completely not perfect, and we make mistakes all the time. But building an organization that allocates that gap for mistakes to be able to help people grow and to invest in them seemed like such an alien idea in 2000, 2005. And I know, in the last 20 years, I'm so glad that business discourse, people like, the psychological safety, the research that came out of Google, people like Simon Sinek, all the business gurus, Adam Grant, all the people that have come out now in the last 20 years, really kind of validating that. But in 2000s, it wasn't that case. It was a cutthroat professional services world. It was all about how much money could you take the client for, and, how much could you extract out of this client. And so it was just so the naivety was in believing that we could have a different type of business that was built around talented. In fact, Hedgehog Lab's purpose, and again, this is what it was when I last left in December 2025, was to create a place to empower talented people to do the best work of their life. And that just felt like a genuine cause to be able to kind of get behind. And that's where I'm talking about the naivety, not necessarily in terms of the values and things like that.
Really good. And you're obviously very reflective in terms of your personality and approach, and your consumption of nonfiction, and how that helps inform what you're doing. And I think you've touched on this with me, and I've read some of your blogs, and you've talked about the experience of Hedgehog Labs. What's your view on the emotional journey that you've gone through with Hedgehog Labs, and how you've used your own personal development to manage those highs and lows?
Yeah, and I think it's an incredible emotional journey. Like I said, it's great sitting here today thinking about where the organization is. If you look at it now, it's got a great management team. It's got an incredible team of people, incredible list of clients, past and present, if I may say, that we're working with, the organization's working with. But, like I said, it's never people, they do the classic, you start off here and you go like that, in terms of the growth of an organization. Emotionally, it's never like that. It's complete, lows, complete highs. And, it goes with the pivots. We've had, and I talked about this publicly, we've had 2 or 3 near death experiences at Hedgehog Lab in terms of the company. And that's really difficult. And in hindsight and the retrospective feeling, I think being this hero like leader and hero founder, where you feel like everything's on your shoulders, was definitely a negative for me in terms of some of the behaviors it enabled, and some of the challenges that I faced, and some of the burnout I faced in the organization, where you just felt like you were literally pulling the organization along. So there's lots of learnings, and emotionally, it has been quite a roller coaster all the way until the succession and moving on from the business, because it's never a straight line. And I think particularly when you're a founder, I think your level of attachment to the business, you're so intertwined, right? The identity that you have gets so intertwined. And certainly towards the later years, as I was thinking about succession planning and I was moving through that exit from the business, that was, I think without the support I had outside, incredible friends, family, my wife, etc., it would have been really difficult to navigate. And ironically, I'm part of a membership group, like, a group called Post Exit Founders. And you find that, like,
Like a therapy
there's so
session.
much. Oh yeah, I mean it's incredible. And by the way, there is no correlation to whether people think, oh, if you made a big exit, if you made £1 billion, somehow your exit, that emotional journey is different. There is zero correlation to how much money you've made to actually what that emotional journey is. I've met founders whose businesses have failed completely and they're the happiest that they've been in their life, and I've met founders who've sold for £1 billion and they're just so miserable, still in therapy, going through
Wow.
addiction therapy. So I think ultimately it's a really challenging emotional journey. But I think to be able to, that is part of being a founder. And obviously I'm going again now for a third time. I think this time I'm a bit more aware of that. I'm a bit more aware of that journey. I think that the first time I didn't really get much of a chance. The business launched and failed in 9 months. The second one lasted for 19 years, and hopefully it'll continue to outlast me. Hopefully it'll be a generational company in terms of what it does. But you learn to deal with that emotional journey a little bit better. Hopefully a third time.
Yeah, Romesh, what about yourself? I know we talk a lot. We've interviewed many people who've exited, and what's your view on exiting, the emotional attachment? I know you're attached to your brand and what you do. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, I think something that Sarat said is something we've heard a lot. This particular word, roller coaster. We've heard it a lot, right? It's the ups and downs, the resilience that you need. You also talked about emotional attachment, Sarah, because it's your baby, right? Business is kind of, when you found a business, it's an extension of you, really, isn't it? In many ways. So I think it takes incredible strength to to take the steps, to take the hits, I suppose, but also to then maybe pivot or reinvent. We had a great chat with a lady called Gillian Jones Williams, very successful entrepreneur. And she talks very specifically about reinvention. And I noticed how many times you, Sarat, said the word pivot. So yeah, and it is emotional, and you do take enormous pride in what you're trying to build, right? So I do understand the very personal nature of it, and it's hard, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think, if I'm being honest, and thank you for asking the question, Mike. If I'm being honest, the thing I found hardest, my business is in the 6th year now. Being an employee, quite the opposite of you, Sarat. Being an employee, albeit a director, finance leader of businesses for most of my career, and then to kind of enter this world of such uncertainty and so many variables. You can't control everything, right? It's not that kind of environment. And I think it takes adjustment, it takes getting used to, and also a real understanding that, gosh, you can't control everything. Don't try and control everything. Just focus on what you can control, and take a step back, and kind of check yourself and make sure that you're working hard in the right ways. That's how, I think I kind of look at it. I mean, Mike, back to you in a way, because you started your entrepreneurship journey as well, kind of quite late on as well. Have you found that adjustment quite difficult?
Yes, I'm different to you. Sorry, as you know, I was a corporate person for a long time, and then I exited and have set up now, and I'm on my 3rd business already with it, and coming up this year. It's having that corporate experience is valuable, actually, because it allows you to learn the skills. Your point around an MBA being really interesting. I think you get that a lot in the corporate world, but then coming out and the emotional challenges of having a bad month or a bad quarter, or something, not losing an opportunity that you really wanted. And I think that's all the things that we all experience. And I think I've actually learned to appreciate those opportunities more than I did. I think, when you have the bad times, you start to think about what that might mean. And I use the word pivot, but I use the word kind of learn and adapt and ensure that your organization is robust enough to be able to withstand what you're trying to do and achieve. What would be your recommendations for a founder based on what you're doing, and now with what you're trying to launch on thredspan? What would be your recommendations for founders of businesses as they're going on this roller coaster ride that we're articulating on this chat?
You know what, Mike? I think the one thing I will say, and I've been running a business, and I said I've been a founder, I've been an entrepreneur all my life. I think the last 5 years have made it exceptionally difficult, certainly in the UK, to be a founder, a business owner, an entrepreneur, whatever it is. And it doesn't matter which field you're in. I think certainly, and I know we'll come on to it, because I know I'm not supposed to say the swear word AI, as much as, most people do. We're living in an uncertain world, and, it doesn't matter which business you're in. You could be doing a traditional plumbing business, and I think the world we live in today is drastically different from 10 years ago. And you know what? Despite the financial crisis, I felt quite lucky to be able to start a business in 2006, 2007, when, 2007 is when we started trading, and despite the financial crisis, there was plenty of opportunity. I think it's really, in terms of advice, it's really difficult. I think, my advice is you've got to have great support systems, right? And there isn't a like one size fits all support systems. And to your point, Romesh, in some senses that can be a good FD, because running a business certainly is a lot about making sure that you don't run out of cash, and you've got the right processes and systems in place, etc. But in some senses it could be a coach. It could so I've been really privileged, Mike, that certainly in the last kind of certainly post COVID, because COVID was a really difficult time for me, and I don't know if you saw the story that I talk about a lot. We lost 70% of our revenue during COVID, going into March. And it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, and it was on me to effectively turn this business around and bring it back to where it needed to be. Now, to be fair, that was not the truth. There was an entire business working their socks off. And so this is not to discredit other people, because the whole business was working their socks off to try and turn the business around. But it felt like that as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and also as the CEO of the business. And it very quickly became apparent to me after 6 or 7 months, where I really struggled, that you need that support structure. So one of the things I always tell, and I mentor some younger, certainly younger leaders and CEOs and stuff, and I say, you cannot overestimate the value of a good coach. So I've had a a coach at work for a few years now, probably 3 or 4 years. And whatever the support structure is, whether it's, for me, it's been my wife at home, I've had a coach, even therapy. So, I've been in therapy for a long time, and to be able to get that support systems in place, because we talk about the emotional journey, but the reality is, how do you cope with that? And certainly, the less experienced you are in a certain domain, whether it's starting or running a business, you need the right support structures around you, whether that's family, whether it's friends, whether it's professional therapists, whether it's professional coaches, whether it's advisors, non-execs, boards. I do, as part of kind of my new career after Hedgehog Lab, I'm doing a bunch of non-exec work. I'm a chair in a small, health business. And you need that support structure, of either people who've had the experience and been through that journey to try and kind of give you guidance and seek advice, or just somebody you can vent to at the end of the day. Because like Romesh said, it's just, there's no sugarcoating it. Some days are just awful, right? Like you said, the quarter doesn't hit, and Friday is payroll, and that client that said that they would pay haven't paid, and you're up Thursday night thinking, how am I going to make payroll on Friday? That sort of stuff. There is no other outlet to it than to actually talk to somebody, and to really kind of let it all out. So for me, I think it's about having that right support structures around you.
Can I ask a question? Because you talked about support structures, but you didn't once mention skills. You actually really talk about the emotional support structures, right? That's what you're really talking about here. And it's a lot of what people don't realize. People teach lean startup and digital skills, and often I was presenting at a university and they said, what do I need to know about AI and what skills? I'm like, to set up a business. I'm like, you're missing the kind of key challenges you're going to have. It's the emotional support that we're really all talking about here, isn't it?
Oh, 100% emotional. And I always used to find it funny, when I went out and I spoke to people, or whether I did probably, and people talk about the soft skills agenda, and I kind of go, well, the soft skills agenda, first of all, they're not soft skills, they're the hard skills. It's very easy. I say this as a technology. Teaching somebody how to use AI is a learnable skill, right? Teaching the point, you're right. And I think, I'm not saying skills are irrelevant. I work in the tech sector, and skills are super relevant. And in fact, everything we used to sell was skills. But the skills are not, they're not the table stakes, in terms of where the challenges are. Whenever we had problems in the business, they were not because we weren't great programmers, or we weren't great product managers, or we weren't great. It was always because there were communication issues. And so the soft skills ultimately are all underlying emotional stuff, right? So how you communicate is driven by emotions. It's the human stuff. How you negotiate, how you feedback, how you engage, how do you come on a podcast and speak in a way that's, all those things, are what people call soft skills. And I think, if you, maybe I'll get on my, soapbox here. If I think there's a big challenge with, we talk about the growth agenda in the UK and the challenge around delivering more entrepreneurs, etc. Yes, there is an ecosystem challenge, and there's lots of, talk around government funding for startups and venture capital and all of those things. But I do think the investment we make in young people on soft skills, or as I would call them, hard skills, is not good enough. Not enough young people get to understand the core skills around communication, negotiation, EQ. And so I 100% agree. It's the things that wrap up into your emotional quotient rather than things that wrap up into your IQ or any of the tech skills that you've got.
Such an important way of articulating it. Do you agree with that, Romesh? You do, don't you? That's
Yeah,
part of our philosophy as a
yeah,
team.
definitely. I loved, Sarah, that you said they're not soft skills, they're hard skills. It's true, isn't it? It's true. And yeah, I think it's an important skill to develop in young people, particularly with, I might venture into mentoring that swear word now, particularly with AI. I think my instinct is that we need to lean into our humanity and our life and lived experience to thrive in an AI dominated world in the future. That's my sense of things. What's your view on AI, and how do you see AI kind of changing business?
Yeah, so I think that's a great place to go, Ramesh. And I think, I'd be interested in Mike's view too, because I know AI is impacting, no matter, like I said, what business you're on, AI is impacting it. For me, for example, the entire foundation of my new business, thredspan, is AI, right? It's a professional services automation platform, an ERP, an agentic operating system for consultancies. And to be honest, two things would not have been possible in terms of threadspan without AI. First of all, the product itself, because it's an AI product that delivers artificial intelligence based solutions to customers. But also, the other thing that has been really interesting is Threadspan is a business that I'm building as a solo founder. So in my previous business, I had a co-founder, and I am building a product. I'm going to market for it. I am doing all the things that involves building a startup with just one person, one founder. And that's because my co-founder is AI in this instance, right? I use AI to do all the things. I use AI for software development. I use AI for product management. I use AI for my go-to-market strategy, etc. And I think I totally agree with you, Ramesh. I think where in my experience, and I am a lived example, people talk about, how do you implement AI? I'm doing it. AI is in every single thread of this new business that I run. And in some ways, that's scary because you can argue the fact that in a traditional world, 2 years ago, I'd have to employ 5 people to do that work, whereas now I'm getting AI to do it. So you could argue it's taking jobs. But I think for me, it's about productivity, it's about what you're generating. And certainly the bits that I don't think AI is any good at in the organization that I run, or I'm trying to build at this moment, is the human element, right? So AI can never account for taste. AI can never account for judgment. AI can never account for the fine line of selling, for example. You couldn't just get an AI to sell, because this is not about going to a client and reading the 10 features out and saying, oh, by the way, ThreadSpan does these 10 things and ergo you should buy. It's about tapping into that emotional journey. And again, we come back to that emotional thing, that emotional journey that most leaders and founders have of frustration with their existing tools, of it being more difficult. And so everywhere where I see the value in terms of what I can add that comes beyond AI is the human elements. It's judgments, taste, this hard skills. Those are the things that AI can't do very well. It can do all the automated stuff and the technical stuff really, really easily. I'd be interested in your view, Mike, and I know you're building an AI-enabled business, etc. Do you see
Yeah,
that, like in the tension?
I I love how you're going for a one employee business. We did a thought experiment last week for a 0 employee business. How would we actually do that? And when we boiled it all down, we said the only thing we would really need in the middle is a really good customer success manager. And that is a human role. The software could be external, everything could be done in that way. And we were like, whoa, this is actually nearly achievable. And I say nearly achievable because things will change around that. But we genuinely believe that's possible. And the speed with which we can develop software and give it to someone to experiment with requires a few people with a bit of a vision, and you could let that business then go on its own with just a customer engagement strategy, which is the human side of selling, things like that. And I agree with you there. So there's a key role for humans in there, but it is changing. And I think that's exciting. I think it allows opportunities for different businesses to spin out, for real problems to be fixed much more quickly than have ever been done before. But people have got to think in different paradigms, in my view.
100%. I mean, and I'm overall optimistic. I mean, it doesn't mean, I am giddy. I'm a giddy hyper for AI. In that, I think there are real challenges around the ethics of
Yeah.
it. I'm really challenging about, there are always, like with any technology, there is both good and bad. The same was said of computers when they released. The same was said of the internet when it released. The same was said of social media when it, every new kind of advancement that comes in technology has both pros and cons. But I think, as it's a net positive for things like productivity and progress. Also, just to be clear, I don't think my ambition is to build a one-person business, because my ambition is actually to get other people to do the work, and then I can go and retire on a beach somewhere. But obviously, at this moment, as a starter,
The entrepreneur in you won't be on a beach, Sarah. I don't think
yes, that's
Exactly. You'll be thinking about business number 4, I think, at that point.
yeah.
I
I think
yeah, I think so.
I think one of the interesting things is you introduced the topic as the swear word that is AI. It's a pity that there isn't yet a lexicon. Someone will come up with the right word that talks about how human and AI working together is actually the game changer. And for me, that's what I really believe. And there just needs a new adjective to describe what that is. And if someone comes up with it, that would become the new normal word. Because the best examples I see is when you change a human role, but they are amplified by the fact they've got AI supporting them.
Yeah, 100%. Jokes aside, I think certainly it's like it's a human computer interaction, right? I think humans have become
Yeah.
infinitely more productive. There is not an industry or a field where computers have not improved things, whether it's in terms of communication, whether it's healthcare, so I think AI is exactly the same. I think I don't buy into the rhetoric that AI should replace humans or or will replace humans. I think there will inevitably be job impacts, simply because I talk about software engineering, for example. So the other reason why this is the right time for thredspan is, if I had to launch thredspan 2 years ago, I'd have to seed it with £1 million worth of capital. I'd have to hire a team of 4 or 5 people to get to where, I mean, we're just about to go to beta in the next couple of weeks. That would have been impossible in a previous world, to build a complex ERP product, Mike, in less than 8 weeks.
I agree.
With one person. So you can see, in some ways it's enabling economic progress, because it's allowing me to launch and grow a business that then creates jobs and economic output. But at the same time, like I said, you could the bear case for it is, you could say, well, technically that was 5 jobs, that you could have had, that AI is doing. But my argument is, those 5 jobs would never exist, because I would not have put £1 million into it and a year's worth of work to get to where it needs to be. So I think it's enabling more. I think the one point about entrepreneurism I did want to say, which is both of you are saying, is I think one thing that I'm really excited about is, I think AI will create more entrepreneurs. I think it'll create more economic progress, because there is an opportunity that the barrier to entry to some of these things now is much, much lower.
I think that's very insightful.
I think that's great.
Yeah, I think AI will create more entrepreneurs. I think that's really fair. I think I agree with many aspects of what you're saying in terms of AI and productivity and business and opportunity. And yes, I can see it creating jobs in the future. What I worry about is, because I think I'm really excited about AI, but I'm really worried about AI as well. I think more about the societal impact, because I worry there will that the jobs that may be lost because of AI kind of doing certain tasks may not be replaced quickly enough at the beginning of that process. And I think there may be a window where society kind of needs to catch up. and how that works is something I can't quite visualize at the moment. So yeah, we'll see.
And you could dedicate a whole podcast to that, Ramesh. And
It
that, I think,
really is.
anyone who pretends that there won't be disruption is lying. Yes, there will be job displacement. There will be, but I think it also creates other economic opportunities. And like with anything, and certainly in the north here, we have history of with things like mining and stuff, where an entire industry gets wiped out, but it does get replaced eventually. I think the irony is, I think unlike previous revolutions and changes, whether it's things like the industrial revolution, that disenfranchised farmers, etc. AI is uniquely a problem around what I would normally see as highly paid knowledge work. So the displacement you're going to see now is not in the miners or the plumbers or the bakers or some of the traditional union industrialized jobs that you would see. You're seeing highly paid tech people now being displaced. I still think it's not a case that all jobs will disappear. I think we'll rationalize around the right kind of jobs, certainly in tech. And I do think it's about the case that we'll produce more software, which means Jevons paradox, which is eventually more software means more jobs will be created. So I think things that like I said, the barrier to entry is so low. Like, I could not have started this business 2 years ago without the help of AI. And my hope is many more people are doing that. In fact, I'm having loads of conversations with people that are going, perhaps I can launch my business now. Perhaps I can do this now. And so, yes, jobs in terms of traditional employment will be disrupted. But to be fair, Ramesh, and again, I don't want to get on my philosophical point, traditional employment has been being disrupted for the last 10 years. So, and it's interesting, you do the FD consultant. I'd be interested in your view in that. A fractional FD or a fractional CTO wasn't a thing 15 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
when I launched the business in 2006, if you said to somebody have a fractional CTO, they'd probably laugh at you, in the sense that how is that going to work? Now everybody's a fractional CTO, everybody's a fractional FD, and obviously, based on the business you're running, that plurality in careers has become this idea of having one safe job where you work for 50 or 60 years and they give you a watch when you retire has completely gone out of the window, 10 years ago.
Yeah, probably longer than 10 years ago as well, I'd argue. Yeah, I do agree with that. I do agree with that. And I definitely see technology as a huge enabler. And I like and totally agree with your statement that AI will most likely produce more entrepreneurs because it reduces barriers. That's such a great way to put it. It reduces barriers to entry, right? It takes them away in many instances, just blows them away. As I said, it's more the pace of the disruption, because I think we're not going to necessarily have this like for like, job disappears, job created. I think it's that transition that I think we need as society to kind of consider and successfully navigate to make sure we that everyone is in a good place. Yeah,
really good. I will knock it on the head there, because I think this that has been so interesting. Though I have learned a lot about you, more than I knew previously, Sarat, and learned a lot about Hedgehog Labs, which has been fascinating. But we've also delved into some really interesting topics. Romesh, any really interesting takeaways you would like to raise?
I think the last point was really powerful. The opportunity of AI, the opportunity for entrepreneurship with AI. And Sarat, thank you for those brilliant sound bites. It sounds like a cliche, but really, really good. But also earlier on, where you talked about very personal experiences, the emotional journey, that's very resonant, right? I think we all as founders here in this conversation, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will feel this as well, or watchers will really, really identify with those feelings and the need to surround yourself with support mechanisms, people, coaches, the various things we talked about. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I also liked your the framework that you described, the values, etc. That was really interesting. So I've got lots to take away and digest. But yeah, I'm very grateful that you came on today to share your insights with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Yeah,
both.
really.
It was a really good conversation, and yeah, I'm sure we could have talked for more, but I think there was some good takeaways from that for me too.
Yeah, I think I'm going to not summarize because I think Romesh has done such a good job, and leave it with the takeaway that AI will create more entrepreneurs. If that is the nugget from what we learn over the next few years, that would be exciting. And to your point earlier, Sarah, around it's quite a difficult environment for founders and entrepreneurs right now. So if we could find out how to help that, then that creates really exciting opportunities going forward. But thank you very much for joining us. So brilliant. So thank you everyone very much for listening or watching, and we hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Strive and Thrive is a podcast for entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders. Please like, follow, and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Strive and Thrive.